On the evening of the 27th of September 1994, the MS Estonia set sail from Tallinn bound for Stockholm, carrying hundreds of passengers and crew, as well as cars and trucks tightly packed on its roll-on/roll-off deck. For many, it was a routine crossing of the Baltic Sea, a journey that had been made countless times before. Yet in the early hours of the next morning, what seemed like an ordinary voyage transformed into one of the most catastrophic maritime disasters of the 20th century. By the time the sun rose over the Baltic, the Estonia was gone, swallowed by the waves in just over an hour, taking 852 lives with it and leaving only 137 survivors clinging to the brutal reality of what they had just endured. The official story, repeated for years, was that the cause of the tragedy lay in a catastrophic failure of the ship's bow visor, the massive 50-ton gate that allowed vehicles to roll on and off the car deck. Under the pressure of stormy seas, the visor's locks gave way, ripping it from the ship and exposing the car deck to torrents of water. With no internal bulkheads to contain the flooding, the water rushed in unchecked, destabilizing the vessel in minutes. Survivors described terrifying bangs as if the ship had collided with something, followed by a sickening list to starboard. Within moments, people were stumbling through tilting corridors, water seeping in, lights flickering, alarms sounding, panic spreading like wildfire. On paper, this explanation made sense. Roll-on/roll-off ferries had long been considered vulnerable to flooding on their car decks. Once the free surface effect set in, water sloshing from side to side without barriers to stop it. The ship's stability could be lost in a heartbeat. The Estonia's visor design, with only 3 main locks, had been flagged by some engineers as insufficient. In hindsight, investigators said it was a tragedy waiting to happen. Yet for the families of the victims, and for many maritime experts, this explanation was not enough. It did not account for every detail of that night, nor did it quiet the whispers of conspiracy that grew louder with every passing year. The Estonia had not always borne that name. Built in 1980 by Meyer Werft in Germany, the vessel had already lived several lives before being sold to Estlin in 1993. She had been Viking Sally, Silja Star, and Wasa King, sailing routes between Finland, Sweden, and beyond. Along the way, she had endured mishaps, groundings, propeller damage, and even violent crimes on board. By the time she became Estonia, she was the largest Estonian-owned ship, a proud symbol of the young nation's independence after the collapse of the Soviet Union. To Estonians, she was more than a ferry. She was a floating ambassador of their reclaimed sovereignty. That only deepened the wound when she vanished beneath the waves. When the Mayday call went out in the early hours of the 28th of September, other ships in the Baltic scrambled to respond. The MS Silja Europa picked up distress signals and tried desperately to reach the Estonia. Captain Esa Michaela later described the conditions as a typical autumn storm, rough but not extraordinary. Yet by the time rescuers arrived, the Estonia was gone, and the sea was littered with bodies, life jackets, and overturned rafts. For many, the shock was not only the speed of the sinking, but the apparent lack of effective action from the crew. The official inquiry would later criticize the crew's failure to organize a timely evacuation, noting that chaos reigned in the final minutes. The inquiry, published in 1997, concluded firmly the visor failed, the ramp was torn open, water poured in, the ship capsized. It was, in their words, a straightforward case of design flaws meeting bad luck. But was it really so simple? Even before the ink was dry on the official report, alternative theories began to circulate. Survivors spoke of bangs that felt like collisions, of water flooding in faster than seemed possible. In 2020, a Swedish documentary reignited the debate by revealing footage of a large hole in the ship's hull. To the untrained eye, the damage looked suspicious. Steel bent outward as if blasted from inside or struck from without. The implication was clear. Perhaps the Estonia had not merely succumbed to a visor failure, but had been hit by an external object, possibly a submarine or an explosion. The Baltic in the 1990s was a sea of secrets. The collapse of the Soviet Union had left the region awash in shifting alliances, shadowy military operations, and covert cargo transfers. Rumors had long circulated that the Estonia carried sensitive military equipment on its final voyage, perhaps even contraband smuggled under the noses of customs officials. If true, it raised the unsettling possibility that the ship had been targeted, either deliberately or by accident. Swedish defense sources later admitted that military shipments had been made on the Estonia in the the weeks leading up to the disaster, more than was initially disclosed. Could one of those shipments have gone catastrophically wrong, or had a submarine shadowing the ferry accidentally collided with it in the darkness? The hole in the hull seemed to lend weight to such suspicions, yet experts were quick to caution. The wreck lay on a seabed scattered with jagged rocks. As the Estonia settled, grinding against the bottom, parts of her hull could easily have been torn open. Investigator Tari Rusapu argued that without context, the footage was misleading. The hole was real, yes, but the story behind it was less certain. Still, public demand for answers forced authorities in Estonia, Sweden, and Finland to reopen parts of the case 3 decades after the tragedy. Amid these debates, one of the strangest subplots of the disaster continued to fester: the fate of Captain Avio Pite. Pete had not been in command that night. His colleague Arvo Andresen was captain on duty, but Piet was on board as a passenger. In the immediate aftermath, his name appeared on survivor lists. Eyewitnesses claimed to have seen him lifted into a helicopter. Some even swore they recognized him in footage stepping out of an ambulance in Sweden, and then he vanished. Officially, Pete perished with the ship. The inquiry insisted he had been last seen helping organize the evacuation, but his presence on early survivor lists became fuel for endless speculation. He'd been silenced because he knew too much. Was he taken into protection, or was it simply a clerical error in the chaos of rescue operations? The mystery of Captain Pyatt remains one of the Estonia's most haunting loose ends. For the families of the dead, these unanswered questions have been a source of agony. Some documents related to the case have been sealed until 2069, a decision that only deepened suspicions of a cover-up. Former investigators like Margus Kerm have argued that intelligence agencies in the West may hold files that would shed light on what really happened that night. Yet access has never been granted, leaving survivors and families to stew in uncertainty. What makes the Estonia disaster so enduring is not only the scale of the loss, 852 lives in peacetime Europe, but also the way it exposes the fault lines of trust between governments and citizens. Was it a straightforward engineering failure, the tragic but predictable outcome of flawed ship design, or was it something darker, something hidden beneath layers of secrecy and national interest? Every new revelation, from the hole in the hull to the admission of military cargo, adds weight to the suspicion that the full truth has never been told. In the decades since, the disaster has reshaped maritime safety. The International Maritime Organization mandated stronger visors, reinforced ramps, and new standards for car ferries. Ships were retrofitted, regulations tightened, lives likely saved as a result. But those improvements came at a terrible cost, paid by the passengers of the Estonia. For their families, safety reforms are cold comfort when weighed against the silence surrounding what really happened that night. Today, the wreck of the Estonia lies 85 meters beneath the Baltic, a steel tomb on the seabed. In 1995, authorities controversially decided not to raise the ship or recover the bodies, instead designating the site as a maritime grave. For many, that decision was yet another betrayal, a way to keep the wreck, and any secrets it might hold, out of reach. Flowers and memorials on land serve as the only markers of the tragedy, while on the seafloor, the ship endures as both evidence and enigma. 30 years on, the questions have not gone away. They cling to the story like barnacles, impossible to scrape off. What really caused the sinking of the MS Estonia? Was it simply a failed visor in a storm? Or was there something more? Something governments still dare not reveal until the sealed files are open, until every possibility is examined without prejudice or politics. The sinking of the Estonia will remain not only a maritime disaster, but also a mystery, one that continues to haunt the Baltic and everyone touched by its cold waters.